right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. And thanks to our coordinator, Ika, who's helping get everything set up. You probably got several emails from our team. And we'll dive in just a minute. We're gonna wait just to make sure we have some people filling in, which is nice. So thanks everybody for joining. My name is Korey Hood. This is part of a series that we've been doing at DiabetesWISE that's focused on asking experts important questions in the diabetes technology and exercise and all things diabetes. And so we're excited today. We have Dr. David on with us, who's the Chief of Diabetes Services at of the Diabetes Clinic at Hoag Center in Southern California. Is an endocrinologist, an expert in a lot of aspects of diabetes care, but I think you have a special passion for diabetes technology and kind of the latest and greatest things. And so we'll hear from Dr. An in just a minute. And as always, Dessi is here with me. I'll let you introduce yourself, Dessi.
Yeah, thanks so much, Korey. Really nice to see everyone. My name's Dessi Zaharieva. I'm an instructor and exercise physiologist in peds, and have been living with type 1 diabetes over 30 years myself. So always have lots of questions, ideas, and really looking forward to kind of brainstorming and chatting with Dr. On. We have that shared interest in kind of technology. So I always have the pleasure of kind of learning from you and all of your videos that you're posting online and keeping the community informed on the latest and greatest things. We're excited you're here with us.
Yeah, glad to be joining you guys. I mean, I remember DiabetesWISE. I think like when I first heard about it, I was like, this is such a really valuable resource. And it's only become more valuable now that there's so many more pump companies, all these different sensor models. So very exciting platform you guys have built out.
Yeah, well, thank you. And quickly about me and about DiabetesWISE, I'm a psychologist, a health psychologist by training, and do a lot of work in behavioral science, but have focused my career around working with people with diabetes. And the like David, what you just mentioned about DiabetesWISE, it's an outgrowth of work that we've been doing over a lot of years, where we were realizing that people with diabetes weren't always able to understand kind of the landscape of technology that's available to them. And so we wanted to provide a place that maybe acted a bit like a Consumer Reports of diabetes technology and devices, and so that people could review and understand what's available, and then also help them make choices. And it's kind of evolved, and it's there's so much technology, so much out there. And I know that you've worked also in the diabetes apps, like mobile app space. I think that it's been a while, but I think you wrote a chapter for the American Diabetes Association, and like that stuff is constantly changing. And so it's great for us to have this conversation. And for anybody who's here and isn't familiar with DiabetesWISE, check it out at diabeteswise.org. And over the last year, we've had this huge move to include more about exercise and physical activity, led by Dessi and her team. And so we're excited to just kind of dive in. One of the places that we were kind of thinking that might be a good place to start, and Dessi and I will chime in too, but we're thinking like what's exciting to you, David, in terms of like what's out there now in terms of technology, and or what do you expect to come? Like what's pretty exciting to you?
Yeah, we're kind of it's a really exciting time. I feel like we're a little bit in like at the transition phase of a lot of things. I think, like Omnipod 5, like all the AID systems that we all talk about have kind of matured on the market, right? There's no brand new AID system, I guess, other than Twist. And so I think they've all kind of matured, right? Like Omnipod 5's been out for a few years. It's great. Control IQ and the tandem pumps have been out for a little while. And the G7 platform has been out for a while. The Libre 3 Plus platform has been out for a little while. So I think there's a lot of like iterative upgrades that are kind of coming down the pike, whether that means like new features or kind of refinements around the hardware. So that the next kind of iterations that I'm referring to is potentially like tubeless Mobi, hopefully by the end of the year. Maybe a version of the Libre 3 that does ketone monitoring as well, in addition to glucose monitoring. The G7 15-day, of course, just came out earlier this year. Omnipod 5 is having some really exciting algorithm updates. There's a lower glucose target of 100 that's going to be probably available in the next month or two. So I think just a lot of like, I feel like the AID and sensor space is kind of maturing a bit, and it's kind of like pausing before this next, maybe the next 2 or 3 years where you start to see a more fully closed loop world, and just, better AID algorithms, and, hopefully more sensor, kind of the next generation of sensors, right? So as you probably heard, Dexcom just announced their G8, or at least kind of previewed what they're working on with their G8. I think Eversense has a really exciting pipeline. So we're kind of, yeah, it's an exciting time. But to the whole intro comment about Diabetes Wise, like I am in this stuff all the time. I make videos about it, and like I'm starting to have a hard time keeping up. Like I cannot imagine how like your standard endocrinologist who's seeing patients, 5 days a week and doing non-diabetes care and patients, like how people are keeping up with everything. It's getting so there's so many options now.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think do you get a lot of questions from the people that you see with diabetes type 1, type 2, or on insulin? And do you get the question about like which one should I use? Which system should I use? Which CGM should I use? I mean, are they asking you for, your thoughts on it because you know so much about the topic?
Yeah, that's a funny question. I'm going to turn it back to you guys too. So surprisingly, I don't get that many questions about like what they should use. I think because which is great in a way, because I don't think there's like a single answer that's the best. I think a lot of times people are attached to certain platforms already, right? Like they've been on MiniMed for a long time, or they've been on Tandem, or they've been on Omnipod. And most people with type 1 have just inherently been on Dexcom. And so surprisingly not, I do not get that question very often. When it's maybe someone newly diagnosed with type 1 or kind of first entering the diabetes device space, I think they ask for my opinions, of course, naturally, but I really try to lean into like where people are. So if they're like, hey, I saw, on my Instagram something about Omnipod, then I'll kind of talk to them more about Omnipod. Or if they're like, oh, my friend was using a Tandem and it looked really good. So I don't, in a way, maybe because there's so many options now, it's actually hard to just be like, here are the 5 pumps on the market right now. Let's do a deep dive. But maybe I should more. Yeah, but I'm curious to see what your guys' experience has been too.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think it's really cool to hear your perspective and kind of, it's so true. There's just so many devices out there for people to choose from. And I sort of joke when I was diagnosed and had the option to start on a pump, I was just given, some flyers or brochures and was like, pick one. And as a kid, I just picked the one that I thought looked the nicest. And that was kind of how it was a long time ago. We didn't have things like resources or questionnaires that would help guide us like we do on Diabetes Wise. But I will say in, research and clinical work that I do, the newly diagnosed population that we're seeing and this like push to get, AID started sooner and the positive outcomes we're seeing. I will say that for me, I often see this with the education that we provide is that sometimes these kids and families that are newly diagnosed and still on MDI and looking to switch to a pump, it's a really nice opportunity. We actually offer group classes at Stanford and we provide kind of, neutral information, unbiased information. We actually provide resources directly to Diabetes Wise and let people kind of answer those questions themselves, find out what system may work the best for them. And I really like exactly what you said, David, that no one system is perfect for everyone. I think it's what works best for you. And I think that's something we've been trying to do with Diabetes Wise to make that one step easier. I don't know about you, Korey.
Yeah, no, I have the same experience. I think that I get asked the question the one about like which one more from a personal standpoint, like which ones as a person with type 1, they'll ask those kind of questions and push me, sometimes back me into a corner about which ones that they I like better versus others. But I think that in the clinic, I think people a lot of times are just asking more generally, like what's going to help me about having a sensor, what's going to help me about having automated insulin delivery. Um, and so, I mean, you hit on some of those points too, David, and thinking about like the next stages of, maybe more fully closed loop. Like how do you explain the kind of current state of closed loop? Like, is it like almost there? Is it like, what do you talking to people about it? Like, how do you explain it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really love, I have a lot of analogies when it comes to explaining things, and I think like the self-driving car is a really good one when it comes to AID. And I kind of tell my patients, I'm like, where AID is right now is it's kind of like the Tesla or maybe a really good, self-driving car right now where you can't go to you can't be like, hey, take me to Vegas and then sleep in the passenger seat, right? Like your hands still have to be on the steering wheel, you still have to be attentive. You can't fully disengage from your diabetes or from your car in this example. And that's kind of where we're at right now, right? It's getting better, but you still have to do a lot. You still have to hold the steering wheel more or less. But I think, the fully closed loop is going to be that true self-driving car where you're going to be able to say like, hey, like take me there and be able to close your eyes. Like, and that concept is just such a crazy concept. Omnipod has already talked about their type 2 closed loop. So big caveat there, of course, is that, they're doing clinical trial in type 2, but they've already, spoken publicly that the system is going to have zero inputs, right? You don't bolus, there's no settings, which is kind of a crazy concept. So, I mean, that's like the dream, right? In type 1, to be able to just put on an AID system, zero inputs, not even setup maybe, and have it fully control your diabetes. Now, of course, doing it is very challenging, but that's the goal.
Can I ask you both? Because this is sort of a question. I was actually at that one session, David, that you're talking about. And I will say the audience had a lot of questions immediately, right? Because
Right.
do we think that we're jumping the gun here with the idea of fully closed loop? Are we there? I guess for me, I'm really curious sort of where both of you feel this is. I think with fully closed loop, as the exercise physiologist in the group, I am always thinking like, we can't always navigate exercise without fully closed loop, even with our hands on the steering wheel. And I love that analogy. So I'm always wondering, yes, like you just said, the caveat is it's starting with type 2 diabetes, but of course in the pipeline is type 1 diabetes at some point. So obviously those questions come up. I guess I just wanted to hear both of you and what you think about this. Does it feel too soon? What kind of barriers and challenges do you think we'll face with this? I can just say from my perspective, I think we're still a far ways away from understanding exercise and being completely hands off. But there are some sessions at ADA that will talk about this. So I'm looking forward to kind of being there.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go first. I mean, I think in the type 2 population, I'm optimistic about it. Having done a couple of the clinical trials for other systems like Tandem and Medtronic, their type 2 AID systems and Sequel Twist, like I've always been surprised at how well, and maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was surprised at how well these algorithms work in people with type 2 diabetes. And so I'm optimistic that the next generation of Omnipod, that fully closed loop system, will do a decent job in people with type 2. It might not be 90% time in range, but maybe it's easily a 70%. Let's just say, I'm just making these numbers up. And but I hear your concern. I mean, exercise, as we all know, is like that's the fly in the ointment when it comes to AID. Like it is so hard to do. Like you said, even when you're fully paying attention, exercise is truly challenging. So I don't know. I think exercise may be handled appropriately in a type 2 population, but yeah, you're right. I think we're quite a bit of a ways off in type 1. Although, you hear people talking about, especially people using like certain DIY solutions. I've had multiple people tell me that they don't have to bolus anymore, using certain DIY systems. Obviously, I think there's a certain amount of lifestyle component, baked into that answer when they're talking about that. But I think it's possible. It's not easy, and of course, I think exercise may always be like the carve out, right? It may be like, oh, fully closed loop except for exercise. But yeah, it's definitely a valid concern you have, in my opinion.
Hopefully that means I'll just always have work to do. So
Job
Right.
security, job security.
Yeah, no, I had I really like the way that you put it, David, about like fully closed loop is absolutely possible, and I think is very likely. And I think that, and I also think that we're a little ways away from that, particularly in type one. I remember reading, a paper about like, a hospital level closed loop system. This is in like the 90s, giant machines, people hooked up to it. And there was kind of a offhand comment in there that was fun. It was kind of funny to me. Like, if they could keep people from moving and eating, they can keep like a perfect blood sugar like all the time. And I think it's still true. Like, if we can, like, those are the two big things that we're trying to figure out. And I think the food part will get figured out first. And I think, like you said, David, I think maybe it is, much closer in the type 2 world. And then I'm optimistic, and I have friends who use Trio, particularly Trio, or other kind of open source do-it-yourself systems. But they're doing a lot of work to kind of get to the point, and then they're able to just live their life and not have to do a lot of input. So it's definitely possible, and hopefully we can replicate that and get there pretty soon. Um,
I just wanted to add too that I was recently at a conference and the group out of New Zealand, Neil Cohen and Martin DeBach, and a group there that are working with the fully closed loop systems, actually presented some data on exercise, and it was shockingly positive, like the outcomes, the time and range. And it was funny that even, as presenters, they said, we were surprised by this too, that it performed as well as it did. And so I think we're all optimistic. I think this is what I'm looking forward to, is kind of this next stage as we get there in type 1 diabetes. But it'll be also really interesting to just see where it starts with type 2 and these upcoming conferences.
I wanted to ask, I was looking through um, so coming up, for those of you who don't know, the American Diabetes Association Scientific Sessions is coming up in June. It happens every year. It's a big conference. A lot of new and interesting things are presented. They often talk about study findings, and sometimes the companies release, new products then, and so it's a pretty exciting time. And I was looking through the program, and one of the things I think, David, you mentioned already was about continuous ketone monitoring, and it's like one of the first debates early on in this year's ADA. And so I will admit, like, I mean, I know a little bit about it, like, conceptually, but I think both of you probably know more about it. I don't know, any thoughts on it, or do you want to maybe first explain what it is? Maybe just the name of it, you don't need much more explanation, but tell us a little bit about that, and then, I don't know, your thoughts on it would be great to hear.
For sure. So Abbott is kind of the farthest along in adding a second analyte to their sensor. And a lot of people expect a continuous, like a dual glucose and ketone continuous sensor, maybe even out as early as this year or next year. So the concept is really exciting. There is a lot of debate about how much value it's going to add, especially kind of right out the gate, because it's something there where we don't have a lot of experience with. Obviously, ketones are something that are part of basic education. So especially in the pediatric population. Just a quick refresher for the audience, diabetic ketoacidosis is one of the bad guys when it comes to type 1 diabetes, especially where your body's not getting enough insulin, often associated with high glucose, and you can basically get kicked into this state where you're not able to really digest your food anymore. You're throwing up, nauseous, and it can become very life-threatening if untreated, and it often requires hospitalization. So it's a big deal, and it can sometimes happen really silently or really subtly at first. So that's kind of one of the big arguments for having a continuous ketone monitor, because it could give you early warnings as to when this might be developing. And there are a couple situations where people are more at risk for developing ketoacidosis. So the first one is, if someone is having like a site failure, right? If you're using an insulin pump, but maybe the site is leaking and you may not realize, there has been some data that shows that perhaps your ketones spike before your glucose. So it could be like an early warning sign that your site has failed, which I think would be really helpful. There are other adjunctive medications, so like type 2 diabetes medications, so like SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1s like Ozempic or Mounjaro. And some of these medications can increase your risk for developing diabetic ketoacidosis, oftentimes with like not particularly high glucose numbers. So it can be very deceptive. So some people argue that these continuous ketone sensors can really help people fend off diabetic ketoacidosis. And there's also some other potential use cases. So, for example, people pursuing ketogenic diets, being able to sense ketones in your interstitial fluid could be helpful for that. It kind of assures you that you are in ketosis, which in that case people are intentionally trying to do. But I think the counter argument is kind of that, like for example, when continuous glucose monitors came out, let's say 20, 25 years ago, I wasn't around, or I wasn't in the diabetes space at least, but I would suspect that people were very actively buying test strips, using them, like glucose meters were in high demand, right? But I don't feel that way, and maybe because I'm an adult endocrinologist, but in the adult space, like I don't have a lot of patients that are like, hey doctor, I need refills on my keto sticks for my urine test, right? Like people don't routinely monitor their ketone levels in at least in the adult type 1 diabetes space. So that to me almost is like an indicator already that perhaps people don't find enough value right now in ketones. That could definitely change as now people start to wear ketone sensors. But I just don't know how much urgency there is right now to wear those and to kind of get that information. But I'm really fascinated to see the kind of information it does generate, because who knows, there might be all these signals that we didn't realize because we couldn't monitor it before. But I'm still kind of like the jury's still out. But if you can throw it on my sensor for free or for a very little added cost, and it doesn't change the functionality of the glucose monitoring, then like, sure, why not? But if it's like an either or situation, or if it's like a much higher cost for a continuous ketone sensor, I'm not as sure if it's going to be something I would be craving right off the bat.
Thanks, David. That's super interesting to just kind of hear your perspective. And I agree with all those points. I'm just to share a little bit of sort of where we've been at too, is we're trying to incorporate a lot more of the sort of CKM, again, early stages in exercise studies. So we've got a couple studies coming up, and we just thought about, would it be important to maybe integrate and collect some of this data? We're not necessarily going to test it and look for its accuracy necessarily, but what we do know is, just like you said, 20, 25 years ago when CGMs were around, the MARD, or the accuracy of these devices, was also like pretty wide. And so there was quite a bit of error. And so I think we have to sort of think about that too with any new device, is that people often like to find the issues with a lot of devices when things come out on the market. And I can imagine that being a challenge, is that we, like you mentioned, probably will want to have a fingerstick ketone test to confirm what we're seeing. I always bring up also just like some of the challenges that I can imagine maybe coming out. Although I'm in the US now, in Canada, the units are in millimoles per liter for blood glucose. So even just as a little example, I just think about how confusing that might be to see millimoles per liter as the same units, but for ketone measurements. And so little things like that may turn into actually a large concern if you mistakenly looked at a number and thought it was your glucose versus your ketone value. So I think, again, manufacturers are considering all of these things. Will they show a value? Will they show more colors? And then some of the other questions that for me come up around exercise is, if ketones are elevated, and we also have heard this concept of euglycemic DKA with exercise, and I think that there's going to be some great add-ons to having CKM devices. I also just wonder, once ketones are elevated in this context of exercise, is it too late? Meaning, how do we catch this sort of before it becomes a concern? And these are always the questions of when we see this rise. But the data has been quite interesting in non-exercise data. I'm really looking forward to this session, though. It's actually a debate. And so I always find those are really great because you've got two people basically showing both sides of the pros and the cons. And it always gets to be a really good discussion. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think thanks, Desi and David. I think that those are really great points. And um, I was trying to think as you guys were both talking, like when was the last time I felt like I needed to check my ketones? And I probably should have checked it more often, but it was like a year ago. And so, it really is one of those things that I've not ever felt like a real pressing need for it, except in like when I'm vomiting or like extreme exercise or really high blood sugar. And, those are kind of infrequent events. But I think it's a really good point of like, let's see what the demand is. And maybe there's some data that we learned from having more people wear them that there's more fluctuation in it than we think there is. And that maybe there's some like danger level that, we didn't previously know so much about. But I think that yeah, I like the way you put it, like the jury's still out a little bit on the value and kind of utility of them. Um, I Speaking of ADA, there were a couple of other sessions that I was kind of looking at, and all of them were, focused on different aspects of technology and like what's coming and what's new. Um, the It does seem like there's a lot that's changing in terms of like features. Like I was looking at one um, session that was talking about like new aspects of insulin administration, and I think that people are um, really wanting the ability to have maybe more control over where they set, an automated insulin delivery system or the way that they kind of, interact with the app. Is that what you're hearing, David? Do you think that's part of the reason also that there's kind of more movement in that space of all these kind of like a lot of these systems giving people more features and more options?
Yeah, I think having an adjustable target is one of the most important things. And I think as a society, a medical community, I should say, like I think our comfort level with like lower targets is definitely evolving. So one of the themes that has been coming up in some of my conversations with a lot of like the thought leaders in this space, and I think there are a couple sessions on this at the ADA, is like I think there's one session even titled like, is stage one hypoglycemia that big of a deal, right? Like there's like a
Mm.
debate on it. Because I think before we had CGM and before we had AID and all these amazing tools, remember like the old school thought was like, oh, your A1C can be too low, right? It's like, oh, your A1C is so low, you must be having all this low blood sugar. So, we got to raise your A1C. Which now that we have CGM and we can safely have people run, lower or normal hemoglobin A1Cs, the whole topic has changed. So that debate, level one hypoglycemia, again for your audience, like 54 to 70 milligrams per deciliter, like perhaps that's not even hypoglycemia, right? Because if you don't have diabetes, you can have a glucose level of 67 and be perfectly fine. I think that's the perfect corollary to what you were just talking about, Korey, where like now people want lower targets, right? Omnipod is coming out with a 100 milligram per deciliter target. Medtronic, when they first got there, that was like a big deal. That was like one of the amazing things about the 780G. And of course, SQL Twist now with the Tidepool algorithm brought that down to, with Loop, it brought it down to 87 milligrams per deciliter. And literally just this week, I had a patient tell me like, man, I wish I could change the target and control IQ. So yeah, I think people are definitely excited about it. As someone pointed out in the comments that I don't know if are public to everybody, but Neil Israel pointed out that this could be an FDA issue, which I agree. I think there's like a certain degree of caution that the FDA kind of builds in. So yeah, I think people want lower targets, more configurability. I think the companies are going to slowly get there, but the tolerance and the risk tolerance that the FDA and these official companies have is much lower than, the DIY systems, which is why I think the DIY systems are always going to be kind of pioneering and really on the cutting edge of this, or international systems like Diabloop.
Yeah, David, can I ask if this is, especially being on the adult side, around pregnancy, is this an area that these lower targets may actually be exactly what people need? I think that in the community, have heard this continuously be brought up as a challenge, is that in pregnancy, it's just been really challenging when targets are as high as they are to actually get to those pregnancy targets, which are quite a bit lower. And I think you just brought up a great point, is that, in pregnancy, those lower targets seem to hit in that range of 54 to 70. And so really it just makes people wonder, how concerned do we have to be about that lower target? Mostly just wondering if you see that population and you see a need for those lower targets in pregnancy.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think you're just being polite, Desi. Like you're 100% right. Like that's a huge point that I left out. That yeah, the normal target range in pregnancy is 63 to 140. And so pretty much every algorithm on the market, maybe or other than Loop, is their targets are not optimized for pregnancy. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge reason why we need more customizability and especially lower targets.
I wanted to ask, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A that I think are kind of relevant here. Um, the One of them is about wearing an infusion set for a longer period of time. And the example that was given in here was the 10-day infusion set. And I think that there have been a number of companies that have been trying different ways to get infusion sets to work longer. Um, and there are problems with insulin resistance or problems with infections, and that's kind of what the question is about. But um, so my question maybe for you, David, and then Desi, if you want to hop in, because I think it would be relevant on a couple of different things. But my questions are, uh, is this like a major rate limiting part for like fully closed loop? And then also, like, what have you heard from people in terms of the ones that are using them longer, and particularly with like exercise and movement and things like that? um, any thoughts on those questions?
Yeah, I'll go first, and I'm curious to hear Desi's comment, especially when it comes to exercise. I think, like everything else in diabetes and type 1, it's like a your mileage may vary thing.
Yeah.
So Medtronic has that 7-day extended wear infusion set. And some people, it's perfect and they do great and they're really happy about it. They can change their sensor and their infusion set on the same day, and it works really well. I have other patients who tell me it's a fantastic 4-day set or a 5-day set, which is great until the fact that your insurance company will only give it to you once every 6 days, I think is the most they'll give you, right? So it kind of just exposes the problem of like this gap with sensor, or it happens with sensors and infusion sets where like, you know, a 15-day sensor might be a great 12-day sensor for you, but your insurance kind of doesn't care about that and they won't give you enough. So it practically creates this huge problem. So in the end, I think that market exists. There are some people that are very blessed and are able to have really good quality insulin delivery. There are others that are kind of somewhere in the middle where it'll like work on day 6 and day 7, but their insulin requirements go up, which I think would be very frustrating if I were in that situation. Um, so yeah, I think much beyond 7 days, I don't know how you're going to get much farther than that. And so, as you were saying, Korey, like it's kind of not a sexy thing to talk about in AID, right? Like new sensors and like new analytes and new algorithms, like that stuff is really cool and fun to talk about. But yeah, in many ways, the biggest problem holding back AID is actually like infusion set quality. And like, Twist has done amazing things, but the fact that they only have one infusion set option right now available, like that has been a limiting factor for some of my patients.
Yeah, and that was kind of another part of that question was just around the infusion set issues with the twist. And I think that that's more of a, like you talked about, it's just that there's just one option. And so potentially, as there are other options that grow or other ways to do it, you would think that some of those things would improve, or at least the user experience, I think, would. But in terms of the quality of the product and the algorithm. I mean, I hear people really happy and kind of rave about a lot of aspects of the twist. So, Desi, any thoughts on the infusion set issue?
Yeah, I think it's David brought out some great points. I think one of the really interesting parts about this is, like you just mentioned, David, is total daily insulin increasing, right? So day 1 to day 7 or day 10, like what is that looking like? And that just concerns me a little bit. As you can see, I'm a skeptic, but that's because I'm a scientist. So at first, I'm always going to think of like, what challenges do we face and how do we overcome them? So I may come across as a little critical, but it's only to make these devices work better, I promise. And we do always go back to manufacturers and talk to people about this. We don't just keep these ideas to ourselves. But I do think that one of those concerns may be if insulin delivery is increasing, some of these algorithms have a learned algorithm behavior. So over a few days, if they see that your total daily dose increases and then you change your site all of a sudden, and now your insulin needs decrease, that you could just see that potential worry around increased risk of hypoglycemia. Now, again, like the broad, you know, type 1 diabetes community, will most people have these experiences? Maybe not. Are we just looking at a very small percentage? Maybe, but I always think about kind of the greater population. What kinds of challenges can we face? And one of the biggest things that comes up for me is exercise. So, of course, like not surprisingly, the question around exercise is, how do you keep your devices on? And so the longer we're trying to keep them on and the more people sweat, the more challenging it becomes. So I think it's always going to be a question of adhesive issues. How do we keep them on? We actually offer a lot of resources on DiabetesWISE that are neutral and unbiased. We're not paid by any of these companies to talk about all these different tapes and glues and ways to keep these devices on. But I think as we see these infusion sets and CGMs that are longer wear, those kind of things like overlay tapes and glue become even more necessary to talk about, is how do we keep those on for really active people?
Desi, what are some of the things that you're excited about at ADA? I also know that you're giving a couple talks, and if you do, want to share a little bit on that, I think you have one Friday. Is that right? In
Yep.
the session on what's new with insulin delivery. Is that right? Yeah. So, I mean, tell us what you're kind of excited about with ADA.
There's a lot more on exercise, which is always one thing I'm excited about, is that if we can see more sessions on exercise, they typically fill up. And we used to always get put on the last day at the last time. And it's just really nice to see at conferences that these sessions get spread out. So not only is there one session on Friday I'm speaking at, which is actually not focused on exercise, but it is a project related to exercise. And it's this new concept or new kind of term that we've coined as net IOB. So looking at sort of this, I love seeing David's response to this, because I think we could hopefully catch up over a coffee at ADA and talk about this idea. But we're trying to look at sort of more physiologic responses or displays of insulin on board on these AID systems, and how important that could be to the user to make sure it's not showing kind of bolus insulin only, but in fact is showing prolonged insulin suspension with these AID systems, how that might contribute to, a rebound hyperglycemia episode. It's a little bit difficult when you see sort of these AID systems reporting IOB, but it's not always the most physiologically accurate representation. And so we'll talk a lot about that on Friday and how that relates to AID systems. And then on Sunday, I'm also presenting on optimizing AID for exercise. So again, I think the cool part about this is I get to talk about all different systems. I think it's important that we have so many systems available, not even all in the US, but that means we have to stay up to date and learn about them, because we hope that one day all of the systems will be available here, but we'll be able to share sort of what's up and coming, and looking forward to presenting at both of those sessions.
What about you, David? Are there any things that kind of that as you looked at it, either specific sessions or just kind of like conceptually, or maybe something in the exhibit hall or the Diabetes Wise booth where you can come and get a bag or something like that. So I mean, there's all kinds of exciting things going on there.
Yeah, definitely the Diabetes Wise booth bag was my top
Yeah.
reason. Um, no, but still cool. I mean, I think for me, this time is, not to like kind of drop a whole bomb of another topic, but near the end of our call, but like the cure stuff and the functional cure and the immunotherapy stuff is just so exciting, and it's just blowing up that it's always been there at these conferences, but it's always been like so basic sciencey and not like practical or like near the finish line that like it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to focus on the tech stuff now. But a part of me was like, man, I would just like love to camp out in that like cell bio track and just learn about all the cool things that are happening right now. Because there's just so many different talks about all the different types of research and innovation that's going on there. So, obviously, like we're still far away, but the fact that we're making such meaningful wins in that, progress towards having perhaps like a functional cure, I think it's super exciting, and I'm very excited about that. On the tech space, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about AI, artificial intelligence,
Mm.
in diabetes, which is like, so I gave a talk, full disclosure, at ACE, and like my joke and my goal internally when I gave that talk was like, I was like, I want to make a talk where actually like people learn things, because I feel like we're all in the same place when it comes to AI and diabetes. Like we all kind of have the same knowledge base, and like I don't know. So I'm excited on one hand to go to learn more about AI and diabetes, but I really want to hear people talk about like actual things that are like going to blow my mind, which like so far, having been a speaker myself, it's really hard to like go beyond just the things that everybody talks about, right? Like AI pattern recognition and like AI food recognition, and but anyways, so I'm always curious to see how AI can kind of transform type 1. And then the last thing is kind of to your point earlier, Dessi, about the fact that there's more stuff on exercise. I thought it's really great that there's a couple different sessions on like older adults with type 1. I think that's a really fascinating space right now. I love the fact that there's like a women's health session, which like I think, just like exercise, I think it's something that so meaningfully impacts so many people and their glucose patterns, but like we don't really talk about it enough or have enough practical tips for people. So I'm glad that that's getting more airtime on the ADA agenda.
I totally agree, David. I actually had that session on AI mostly because I want to see like where is that conversation going to go. It's sort of like I don't know. I felt like last year GLP-1s were kind of all the rave. That's what everyone was talking about. Every conference, there's sort of like a big focus. And I will say I'm always kind of so focused on exercise, but looking kind of from a different lens, it was just interesting to see how many like AI discussions there are going to be. So we'll see what will be shared. I also just wanted to highlight a few other exercise talks that aren't in the sessions that I'm presenting at. I thought one that was really interesting is actually by Diaboloop. They're presenting on heart rate monitoring for early detection of physical activity associated hypoglycemia in type 1 diabetes. So I'm actually really looking forward to that, as I work a lot in the space of wearable technology. And it's always been a question of whether it's like patients just reaching out or anyone wanting to know, like, when are we integrating wearable data into like AID systems? And I think there's still many challenges. So that will be sort of an interesting one to hear what outcomes they share. And I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to Lauren Turner, a PhD student at York University in Canada, who's working with Mike Riddell. And she's actually presenting some pretty novel data on neuromuscular fatigue in adults and comparing type 1s and non-type 1s and looking at the effect of carb intake on cycle endurance and neuromuscular function and fatigue. So really looking forward to that. It's sort of an area that's kind of untouched, especially this comparison of non-type 1 and type 1 diabetes. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those few people that are presenting on exercise that caught my attention, but there's a lot more that I'm also looking forward to. And yeah, what about you, Korey? I don't know if there's anything else we missed.
No, I mean those are the same ones, and one other kind of area that I think fits into a little bit of the cell biology and kind of cures piece is all the work that's being done since teplizumab was approved by the FDA, and thinking about, I think it opened the door for a lot of other potential therapeutics. And there was just a nice publication from Mike Holler and his group about ATG and diabetes care. There's a lot of this stuff that is happening on the early stages of type 1 diabetes in particular, and trying to figure out like what we can do, how we can intervene earlier, what we can understand earlier so that we can potentially change the course of type 1. And even if it's not prevention, it's changing the course. Maybe it's just easier. Maybe you need less insulin for longer. And that is really appealing, I think, both from the practical aspects of what that life might be like, but also from a technology standpoint, because we need these great tools for monitoring. We need to figure out better ways for engagement kind of early on. Like, can we use some of the technology and apps and everything that we have kind of earlier on? And so I think that I'm going to be going to some of those sessions and with the lens of like how can technology help this or accelerate it. So I'm excited about those pieces as well. Um, and then the AI stuff is also, it's interesting. I always kind of have this thought, like anytime a presentation about AI, I'm like, how much did you use AI to create your presentation? And I it's just I also just find like the topics that get brought up is really interesting to discuss. And there was one of those sessions that I put in that I think is early on Saturday that I think would be pretty interesting to hear in a couple different spaces. So um, well, we don't want to keep Dr. on too much longer because um, well, everybody's busy, but we want to let him get back to his day job. And then, but if there are any other kind of questions, we have a couple more minutes. You can drop them in here, but please come and visit us at the Diabetes Wise booth at ADA if you're attending. If you see any of us, track us down, ask us questions. This is stuff that we really enjoy and have fun talking about. And then also, if you think about things that you'd like to see on Diabetes Wise or other kind of programming or other experts that we can bring in and learn from them, just let us know. Desi, anything to close on? And then I'll leave it to you, David, if there's anything else you want to add too.
I just really want to say thanks, David, for joining us today. It's always a pleasure. I've been following you for years now, just like learning a lot about technology. And it's kind of fun because we're both sort of in the same space. My focus is a bit more on the exercise side. So I actually look forward to our discussions and hopefully can catch up in person, but really just always learning a lot from you. And I think you're giving back so much to the community. So I'm sure those videos take a long time to put together, and we really appreciate them as someone living with type 1 myself. So really just wanted to say thanks on behalf of Diabetes Wise for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, they are really fun to do. Like, it's been such a blessing for me. And like, yeah, it's helped my career in many ways. Yeah, it's funny because I'll like run into people like heroes in our industry, and like I feel like they kind of they'll recognize me and they'll say something nice, and I'm just like, wow, like you know who I am. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So it's been a huge blessing. Um, so ironically, I actually haven't made any videos in like 4 months, so I need to like get back to work and make more videos. There's so many cool things happening. But yeah, so hopefully I'll get back to making more videos. But regardless, thank you for having me and having the opportunity to just share and nerd out about diabetes tech.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining. This will end up live, or this will end up as a clickable link on Diabetes Wise. We'll make sure we share it if you want to go back and see anything. And like I said, always reach out to us if there's anything that you'd like to see in future sessions. Thanks, Dr. An, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All righty, take care.
Bye.
Bye all.